Terrible.
Hi, Harrison. Hi, Patrick. Hi, Domenica.
Hi
Hi,
there.
Dome.
Patrick, hi Carlito. How are you?
Hi there.
Good. How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Glad to see you back at the house.
I know, it's nice to be back.
For those that don't know, Domenica and I live together.
Oh, that's nice. I have two colleagues that live together, and so it's always so funny when they're in meetings together and in completely different locations, but knowing that they're in the same place. I'm just like,
Yeah.
have you ever thought of just joint meeting?
Hi, Eliza.
Oh, I think you're on mute.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thank you guys. How has the festival been?
So
Good.
far, so good.
Nice.
Wait, Harrison, you're in Palm Springs?
No, I'm actually in Michigan. I'm with my family at our lake house. We come out here like every summer if we can. And it's super peaceful, and I'm glad to be able to work from here. But I do feel a little like Palm Springs FOMO, because Short Fest is always a blast.
It's so fun.
Hello.
The best.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. How are folks?
Good.
And I want to shout out Corey, who is doing captions for us and has been all week.
Hi.
And introduce you all to Patrick if you don't know him already.
Yes, I'll be moderating. I am very excited to talk to all of you. I will ask if each of you I know I got the list of like where you all work and titles and such, but I'd love to, I know we don't have everybody yet, I don't think, but would love to start just hearing from each of you to make sure that I'm one, saying your names correctly, two, giving you the credentials that you most like to use. So we can jump around, but would love to hear from each of you just so I can verify that before we start. Katie, you were here first, so I'm just going to make you go first.
A question. Are we doing image descriptions when we do, if we introduce ourselves at all?
We absolutely
like-
can. Yeah, we absolutely can. I mean, I think it makes sense given also the nature of the panel. We haven't been doing them so far, but we absolutely can.
Okay, cool. Let's see. I'm Katie White. I'm a producer. I produced Best Summer Ever, which premiered at South by Southwest 2020 and 21. But I guess 2021 makes more sense. And I mean, yeah, for the purpose of this panel, had an inclusive cast of people and crew of people with and without disabilities. And then I do have a film at the fest, which is called What I See When I Look in Sibling Stories, but whatever is easiest there. Independent producer.
Whoever wants to go next.
I'll send it to Domenica.
Great. Hi, I'm Domenica Castro. I'm a producer and founder of a production company called 271 Films. I'm from Mexico City, but I've grown up here in the US, and inclusion and diversity is very important to our company values and our set and kind of the mission of the Hollywood we want to work in. Oh, you're mute.
You're on mute. Yeah.
Always. I'm Constanza Castro. I'm also co-founder of 271 Films. Echoing what Tome said wholeheartedly, also from Mexico City, because we're sisters. And thank you guys for having us. It means a lot.
Good to see you, Cons.
Thank you, Carlito.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify real quick because we haven't officially started, so we are gonna do these again.
Yeah, we'll do these again. This is more for me just to make sure that I if referencing you or mentioning credentials or that kind of stuff, because they sent me a list of names and titles and such. And is there an intro script at all?
Yeah, so I'll go first and I'll do a little housekeeping and say hello and everything. And then I'll kick it off to you. And then Patrick, I just figured you can either introduce folks or have folks introduce themselves. It's completely like up to however you want to handle it. But yeah, I mean, don't worry about like the general intro, and I can take care of, and then I'll
Perfect. All right. Just wanted to
hand
make
it
sure
right
I
off to
wasn't like
you.
supposed to say anything specific or.
Yeah, no,
Got it.
it's really, yeah, it's kind of free form in that way. And right now, I guess we're just waiting for Mohammed, who should be joining us shortly, hopefully.
Hey, my name is Iabo, just in case that was really just being like, how do you say Iabo? It's Iabo from Brown Girls. Nice to meet you all.
Very nice to meet you as well, Yabo.
I guess I haven't gone yet. It's Eliza, pretty straightforward. Her last name is Hayek. It's pronounced like Salma Hayek. And yeah, I'm manager of development at SAG Indie.
Fantastic. Thank you all again for being here. Super excited to discuss this. I've gotten to moderate these before, and they're always there's always fun, but I'm glad how important this one is.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna give it another like minute or two, just see if we get Mohammed. I'm gonna check in with him as well. And then just a general reminder too, because we're gonna have the chats like active, so anyone can use it during the panel. And then if there's anything that you want to share with attendees as well as panelists, you just have to select the drop down before you type in the message or the link. Otherwise, you'll just be sending it to this smaller group of panelists. So just a distinction there if there's something you want to share with everybody. Yeah.
And then Anna, will you come out? Will there be an outro from you as well?
Yeah, I'll pop in right at the end. I'll give you all like a warning about like a 5-minute warning. Again, I'm not gonna be too strict on the switching over to audience questions. Again, like I feel like that's like up to your discretion of when you do that. But I'll just give you all like a over chat for a 5-minute wrap up, and then I'll pop up at the end and put my video back on, and Harrison and I and Corey will all be kind of here in the background off video so that the conversation can stay focused on all of you. All right.
Is it okay if I just take a screenshot really quickly?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Okay, like smile or whatever you'd like to do. Okay, fun.
So funny. It's like the new step and repeat on Zoom.
Yeah, it is.
All right. Well, it is 10 o'clock, so I think we're just going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 3 of Forum at ShortFest. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Anna Souza. I am the Forum producer. I'm also here with Harrison Harvey on the Forum team. We have planned a whole week of panels and roundtables and conversations for you. You can register right up until events start. So please do check our schedule. Be sure to select the ones that you want to in advance and register for those. This conversation is going to be about 45 minutes with about 15 minutes for questions at the end, more or less. Please feel free to submit any of your questions for the panelists using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And we are really excited. Walking the walk, building an inclusive set is one of the most important panels I think we have in our lineup this year. I'm just thrilled to really be hosting this conversation with this fantastic group on something that is just top of mind for everyone right now. And so without further delays, I want to hand it over to our fantastic moderator, who is an executive editor at Entertainment Weekly. Please welcome Patrick Gomez. Hi, Patrick.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for doing this panel. Important was a word I actually used to describe it just before we went live. Anna just used the word important, and I think that word gets thrown around a lot. And I think in this case, it's actually true. Well, other times, sometimes it's not. And it's not important because it's, makes us all feel good about ourselves. It's important because we need to make sure that everyone feels welcome in the creative process of making anything. And so I think that it's super special to have a group of people here today that make sure that that happens on the projects they're working on. And so we're here to hear a little bit from them about why that's something that's so important to them, to use that word again, and also what we all can keep in mind as we start to create projects and make sure that everyone feels that they can be a part of it and enjoy it, and make sure that that film and art is reaching as many people as possible. So I'm going to start and let them introduce themselves a little bit and tell you a little bit about their work and how they ended up here. Katie, you kicked us off before we started the actual panel. So I'm going to have you start us off again and just introduce yourself to everyone, and then we'll go around.
Thank you. Yeah, this is an important panel. I'm happy to be here. My name is Katie White. I'm an independent producer. I live in LA, and I produced the film Best Summer Ever, which was a South by Southwest 2020 and 21 film that is a feature narrative musical with a casting crew of people with and without disabilities. And then I also have a film here at the Shorts Fest called What I See When I Look in Sibling Stories.
Amazing. Iyabo, would you actually kick us off next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Iyabo Boyd. I'm the founder and director of Brown Girl Stock Mafia. We are a collective of women and non-binary filmmakers and industry professionals around the world. There's over 4,500 of us. I'm also a filmmaker, writer, director. I made a short called Me Time that was on the festival world the last 2 years about masturbation and self-care, and had a diverse crew, of course. And I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
All right, Eliza, why don't you take us off next?
Hi, everyone. My name is Eliza Hayek. I am manager of development at SAG Indie, which a little bit to explain that we don't actually work for SAG-AFTRA. We are there to help newer filmmakers through the process of working with a union, maybe for the first time. And for them, I travel to a lot of film festivals. Obviously, right now I'm at home in Los Angeles, but hopefully as things are opening up, I'll start seeing more filmmakers on the festival circuit and letting them know how to work with SAG-AFTRA and also about things like SAG-AFTRA's diversity and casting incentive.
Thank you so much for joining us. And then Cassandra, Domenica, one of you can start off.
Hi, I'm Domenica Castro. I am a co-founder of a production company that I founded with my sister Constanza called 271 Films. We are both from Mexico City, born and raised, moved to the US, and in diversity, inclusion, and just kind of not keeping anybody out, but opening the door for others is very, very important for us.
Hi, I'm Constanza. So I'll tell you a little bit about 271 Films. We're a production company based out of LA, but we shoot all over the States. And we create intelligent, story-driven, innovative content that is also like socially conscious. For us, it's very important to like always push the status quo and give voice to other people. We recently had a collaboration with Lena Waithe's company, Hillman Grad. We produced 10 shorts, actually Katie White produced one of them, called Shoebox, and all of them premiered at Tribeca, and now they're all available. All 10 short films are available online on Amazon Prime. So yeah, we are very excited and thankful and grateful to be here.
Yes, we're grateful that you all are here as well. When we think about diversity and inclusion, I think that there are buckets of what, check marks that we want to make sure that we hit. But I think that we're starting all as a society to realize that there's boxes that we should be looking to check that most people aren't even thinking about yet. We have this panel is being live captioned, and there was discussion before the panel started about what we were including in that to make sure this panel was even as inclusive as possible. I I want to get to the more broader terms of diversity inclusion and the way you all are working on that. But I'd love to hear from any of you in terms of where you feel like we have the most room to grow in terms of thinking about diversity, in terms of expanding what we think of when we hear the words of diversity and inclusion. Just a really small question to start us off.
Whenever I hear diversity and inclusion, I can't disconnect it from politics. And I think that you can't change the politics until you change the economic model. And the way you do it is when you put people in positions where they can gain and have access to resources for their lives. And so that, to me, like, diversity and inclusion really translates into like money and opportunity, and finding a path for that. Especially and opening a path, especially for people that we now are currently very conscious and aware that have been cut out for a very long time.
So obviously it's one thing to realize that there's an issue and like speak in broad terms of like how to do that, but each of you have found concrete ways to do that on projects that you're working on. I'd love to hear from each of you kind of like how you found a way to create action items out of a broad idea of like being inclusive and making sure that you're telling diverse stories and including diverse people that you're working with. Katie, I'm gonna put you on the spot here because you brought it up as part of your introduction. Tell us a little bit about that specific experience.
Well, in making Best Summer Ever, it was a unique film because it was made by an organization called Zeno Mountain Farm, they had been making short films for, I think, 12 years. And they're a group that gathers in Vermont and LA, and it puts together people with and without disabilities to create these very artful projects, music videos, theater, parades. And then, the upping the ante was really doing this feature musical. Within that bubble, it was not easy, but it like we didn't question certain things. So all the films leading up to Best Summer Ever, disability is never part of the character. It just is. So that was really key and has been. And so the making of that film, story-wise, and also casting and crewing, it was just second nature. It was like, well, what else would we do? I think it's really about broadening that. And so on to date, I don't think that I've ever cast somebody with a disability whose character was described as who's written with a disability. And that, like, it's talked about a lot, but I think like that's step one, is like creating space for people that like isn't defining them by whatever their diversity necessarily is. And then there's also the kind of on set perspective of creating these like inclusive sets that are very accessible, because as it stands now, they aren't necessarily accessible. And then that goes back to what Domenico was saying of like that, will take money. And I'm going to pass it on to someone else. I just got nervous.
I'd like to kind of jump on something that Katie was talking about making sets also feel very inclusive. Something that we advise filmmakers on a lot is ensuring when they're hiring, especially their department heads, like if they've vocalized their commitment to having a diverse set, and have you hire department heads who are aligned with the same values, and does your HMU have a kit that appropriately reflects the entire cast? Is anyone expected to be singled out to do their own hair or makeup because the makeup artist is unfamiliar with hair that isn't white? Or does their kit have enough makeup to cover a broad spectrum of skin color? Is your cinematographer experienced enough at lighting non-white actors, because they literally need to be visible and no one's presence should be minimized because of technical choices, and everyone's skin tone needs to be considered when lighting decisions are made. So that's something that we bring up a lot when people come to us for advice about making sure everyone feels safe and included on set.
Katie, oh, go ahead. No,
Oh, no,
please go
no.
ahead. I'm just here to help the conversation go. I'd love it if you all just talked straight through the whole hour. So please never feel bad about wanting to add.
No, it just something that like came to mind is that a lot of times people don't want to give opportunities because some people have not been given experience. And so I think it's also about giving chances. And for us, for example, it's like, you know, we've worked with some, you know, we've hired people that are not as experienced, but I'm like, okay, it's going to be more work for me because obviously I could just hire the person that's made 10,000 films or hundreds of projects, but it's also important to like give opportunity, but mentorship as well. And so like bringing people up and that's how you change the game. It's by providing those opportunities. Cause like, it's like what comes first that, you know, it's like, if they don't have anything on the reel, if they don't have anything on the resume, they can't not advance. And so for us, it's important to, yes, it's a lot more work for me, but it's the only way to actually change the game. And so like, that's something that like Dome and I constantly talk about, like, oh, it's so much more work, but yes, it is so much more work, but it's necessary work to advance and create the change that we're all seeking out and talking about.
I think we also have to not erase the people who have already been working in this business for a really long time. It's not like Black and brown people suddenly picked up a camera for the first time yesterday. You know, there's thousands of people who have this experience. And so it's just important to ensure that we're not assuming that a diverse person coming on set is inexperienced, because that's not true. And there are a lot of resources now, especially in the last year and a half, a lot of resources, including Brown Girls, where you can find literally thousands of people who are diverse to hire. So, you know, yeah, I just want to push back, or just like be mindful of using the word like of how much work it is, because there are a lot of resources there. And if we think less about work and more about preparation and time that we put into building a crew, instead of going, oh crap, we need someone 2 days from now, be like, okay, we're going to be shooting in a month and a half. Let's start putting our feelers out. Let's start, you know, looking at these resources. Let's take some time to be intentional about it, and not wait to the last minute. And just do it in a way that is appreciating the folks who are skilled and making sure that you're being mindful of their schedules, you know, because a lot of folks who are diverse, who are really good, are booked. So you got to make sure that you reach out to them early.
Most definitely. Well, speaking of being inclusive, we have an addition to the panel. Mohammed, go ahead and introduce yourself. Let us know a little bit about your background, and we'll fully integrate you into this conversation.
Hey everybody, sorry I'm late. I'm on Persian time, so just fashionably late. I had another call that was not letting me get off, kind of like that Zoom life. My name is Mohammed Gorjistani. I'm a filmmaker, writer, director, producer. I've, you know, whatever it takes to get it done. Also work as a photographer and creative director. You know, I started a studio, which was initially out of my friend's kitchen in San Francisco, kind of as kind of a reaction to the non-inclusive nature, the inequitable nature of kind of the industry that I was finding myself in, and just, you know, feeling a lot of anxiety, which leads to like creative block, et cetera. So just kind of decided to start my own kind of practice here in the city. And we've kind of grown over the last few years. It's about 15 folks in our organization now. We're split between San Francisco and Los Angeles, you know, making independent films, working on a commission basis, and trying to like represent, you know, filmmakers who come from not just, you know, diverse backgrounds, but also our thing is a little bit about supporting and bringing attention to a little bit more class representation as well. Because I think that's something that's been highly ignored, because it's, you know, it's kind of a big elephant in the room in creative spaces. So we're trying to do our part in that.
Thank you so much for joining us. One of the, there's been discussion about making sure that we're seeking out and taking the time to seek out a diverse group of people to work with and to be inclusive in that. And one of the things that I think, speaking of class and opportunity and all that kind of stuff, you all are fortunate enough to work on projects that allow for people to come from all over the place, and you may be shooting in various locations that allows you to pick from a larger group of people. I'm sure there are some people here watching this today that are working with super micro budgets and maybe not in a large metropolis, so that their pool of people to pull from that are local that could work may seemingly be much less diverse, and there's less opportunity to be inclusive. But I think one of the things that's already been mentioned here is that there's people there. You just have to find them. What advice would you give to people that are working they have to be a lot more localized, and they don't have the time and money to devote to like seeking people out that can come join them where they are?
Well, I have a point of view on, go ahead, I'm sorry.
You go.
I think about this a lot because, America is especially shooting in the United States, like there's such a spectrum of what I think inclusivity can mean, because I actually think it's more about authenticity at the end of the day. So if you're in an area that is predominantly white, and that area, the story is, depending on what you're working on, is predominantly white. Like I'm not in the camp that thinks that like, if Black people should only make Black films, white people should only make white films, Iranian people should only make Iranian. That's monolithic thinking too, So I think sometimes those realities we have to be, if you're shooting in like, Des Moines, Iowa, or outside in rural, Iowa, there's a reality to that. And I don't think like that's the battleground to, if you're an independent filmmaker and you're trying to just make work in that area, you have to be, there's a level of reasonability in how you approach that project and what you can do. And if you can, I think it's more about the process. I think what Yao was saying was like, so well put, like, this can't be something that right when the project comes up, you're like, okay, now I gotta like check these boxes. This is work that you gotta do all the time. And if you build that into your process, into your conviction, then you're gonna be building that community naturally. And then what will happen through that process is, if you find that you're in a place that's not meeting you where you're at in terms of the way you want to work and the kind of people you want to see on your set, then you might actually move somewhere else. You know what I mean? And that's the human experience as well as an artist. So I think there's this balance of like, doing these things from a place of like, why do I want to do this? And if you come at it from the right place, like that might mean that sometimes you might go somewhere, like if you're shooting in Appalachia or somewhere else, that there may not be the same resources based on your budget and that's okay. I just hope that you spent some time thinking about it and trying to address it in a really intentional way. I think that's really what we get, what it comes down to, is not doing these things in some sort of quota way, but through a kind of a living your life kind of way.
Yeah, but I know you were, yeah, go ahead.
I agree with everything Mohammed said. I think it is definitely tough. Like, if you're shooting in a place that isn't diverse, I think that's where you can start digging into the ideas that were being shared before about identifying folks who can be brought up, and having that be a central part of your production there for a shadowing process, etc. And if you're a person that like can bring in people from out of state, if you can afford for that to be part of your budget, then do that, or raise the money to try to make that happen. And even still, like, I'd suggest doing a shadowing program. What we're doing here, like what we're all trying to do, is much bigger than individual projects, and it is tough to take on the mantle of changing this industry and changing the world. But if you're on this Zoom, then that's what you signed up for. So, you know, let's, you just gotta, we're doing it together and you're not alone. And, you know, just be happy with, you know, be really grateful and proud of yourself for taking that time to put in the energy.
I do think that we tend to, in like the filmmaking world, we get stuck in our bubbles and our people, and we're used to working with them, and there's a comfort level. And then I think there is also a fear in language and what we're saying. And I think that, you know, if you are in Idaho, which seems to be, I don't know anything about Idaho, but it seems to be the example. I think it's okay to say like, hey, we're looking for Black filmmakers that we want to work with on this project. We're looking for filmmakers with disabilities to bring you in. And, you know, we want to know you. And I think that like kind of getting scared of saying like, hey, I need to expand my bubble can hold us back in a lot of ways.
Eliza, I'd love to hear from you as one of the resources that Iyabo was mentioning, like people can reach out to, one being hers as well. Would love to hear from you about like, what are common questions you get from creators that have this at front of mind, and what do you feel like is the most helpful information that you've been providing to them when they've come to you?
Sorry. You know, mostly we get a lot of questions about casting specifically because we're working very closely with the Screen Actors Guild. And I guess this would maybe be a good opportunity to talk about SAG-AFTRA's diversity and casting incentive, which is sort of a two-pronged thing where if you're making a modified low budget or a low budget, which are they're the higher end of the features contracts, you can raise your production cost maximum without being bumped up into the next category by a pretty significant amount if you qualify for this incentive by meeting a couple criteria, which is like a minimum of 50% of the total speaking roles and 50% of the total days of employment are cast with performers from protected groups, of which there are 4 according to SAG-AFTRA, which is women, senior performers, which I don't think is talked about quite as much, you know, and that's people 60 years or older, performers with disabilities, and performers who are people of color. And in addition to that, so that's one prong, and then the second is a minimum of 20% of the total days of employment are cast with specifically performers who are people of color. And we think that's a pretty great incentive to increase your budget cap while still retaining the lower rates that you would be paying for your professional actors on either of these films. But something I would like to point out is it's not necessarily, I want to maintain a lower budget cap just by shoehorning in people who fit into these protected groups. And I'm kind of curious to hear what some other people on the panel think about this quote from Jeremy O. Harris in Filmmaker Magazine that I read recently that I thought was very interesting and seems appropriate. He said, and I just want to say this on record in Filmmaker Magazine, if I'm ever again at a fucking white man screening of a movie, one of those feedback screenings, and I ask a question like, hey, X, Y, or Z, who's Black or brown does this, and that feels weird, why? And if they ever again say to me, oh, I didn't even write them to be Black, they just happen to be the best actor, I will jump over the table and choke them. Just stop doing that and start being aware, even if you didn't write this character to be Black, the minute you cast them Black, they are Black. And so now you have to start thinking about what that means to the world that you most likely created within a weird white bubble. Sometimes I feel like there's this weird thing that happens inside the independent film space, especially now that people are talking more about race. Some people are still trying to hold on to this 90s ideal that they don't have to have a real shape to the race relations in their film. It's more imperative now that people do have shape to those things, which I thought was interesting because, again, the diversity and casting incentive is not to just try and get more money. It's that you have to also be very conscious about how you're writing these roles. And I thought he had a very interesting quote. So I don't know how anyone else feels about that.
It is something that I think people have spent a lot of time talking about in recent years, is the difference between colorblind and color conscious, and wanting to make sure that you are, to your point, when you create a character, when you cast someone, be that the color of their skin, their age, their hair color, even, like there's reasons that you put people in wigs or different things, because that tells you something about the character. So I think, thank you so much for sharing that quote. And I would love to hear from some of you about either your own experience with casting someone that maybe wasn't the type that it was written as, and how that changed things, or how it didn't, and how you learned from that experience. And I apologize if you can hear my pup in the background.
Well, just to respond to Eliza, like into that quote, it's interesting. You said Jeremy, right? It's interesting what Jeremy is saying. It's complex though, because I mean, I appreciate what he's saying. He's thinking very much forward and trying to get people on a faster moving train around diversity, which I very much appreciate and I fully support. But also, like speaking for myself as a Black person, if you just, like there are certain tiers. Like if you have any Black people in anything, I'm like, yay, good for you. Like, good job. If you have more than 2 or 3, if you have more than 3 Black people in anything, you're doing good, But like, yeah, there's another levels of like, okay, so the Black people in your film are Black people. Like they have a personality that comes from a person who is a Black person. I mean, Black people are not a monolith. There are plenty different kinds of personalities in that spectrum. But between the actor and the writer and the director have an understanding that this character, whether they speak about their race or not, like verbally in the film, like they have an understanding in their backstory and their motivation and what are the things that they're thinking about that connects them to that identity. But that's not how all, I don't think that it's like required, there's, especially because there's so little representation. Like for me at this point, I'm just excited to see, Black people doing awesome stuff. Like what's that Michael David Washington movie that came out during the pandemic that's just like an action-packed action film?
Tenet.
Yeah, it's like Tenet is a really cool example of this, because it's not really about race at all, as far as I can remember, but it's so cool to see him like doing what he's doing and having the kind of authority that he has, etc. But the actor himself, is not erasing, who he is as a Black person in the role. And like, sure, like maybe there are some ad libs, maybe there's a little bit of something in the writing that helps do that, but it's more about like leaving room, I would think, for the actor to contribute culture to the role. I do worry about, writers, it depends, but I worry about writers who are not of color trying to write a character of color. Like that's its own challenge, But it is also complicated to say to the actor, okay, can you black this up? Like, can you make this a certain kind of thing to like help make me look better as a director, that we represented your culture? Like, it's really, 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 really complex. So
I think so too. I think it comes down to like story and character. And when you make a decision to change, the character to be played by a person of different race than originally written, you have to reshape the world, because the world of that character might be different. And I think it really comes down to bring in a writer, like, find people that know how to write those characters and bring them into the table and like help them contribute to telling the story. Like, I think there's a lot of, and it's collaboration. It's not about policing, but it's about like, I've made a decision to step into a ground that I'm not totally familiar with, and I need help. So I'm going to bring a person who is skilled like I am, who is, ready to help shape the story and make it the best that it can be, and honor the people that I've decided to put on the screen.
I mean, it happens a lot at Las Latinas, for example. Like everybody just like every time we watch a movie and it's supposed to be somebody that's Mexican, and it's clearly like their accent is not, there's just like this whole, I mean, don't get me started I mean, it goes with everything that you're talking about. Casting is like, cast appropriately, and if not, then change the role to be so that you're representing that culture in a way that is respectful, and you're not trying to cheat the audience in a way that, Hollywood has been doing this for a long time.
Because otherwise you're just checking a box, like you're kind of just trying to do something that feels cool and like the thing to do. But it's like, I grew up watching American cartoons for all of my life, and the things that were eaten in those, by the characters were not always representative of like the way I grew up. And so to me, it's like, if you're gonna, create work that is more, like worldly and sort of identifiable with a specific culture or race, or then honor it and like let everybody else feel a little different into it, in it. Like I always adapted to seeing content that wasn't, what I didn't eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in Mexico. That was something that happened to be here, but so it's like, how do you, I think it's about just like opening all of our worlds a little wider and celebrating that.
I agree with Domenica. You have to also be careful though about how those additional writers are credited, how they're being paid, and how they're being visible. Because if you just bring someone in to do a polish, but they don't get any visibility that they were a writer on that project, that's not helping anybody really.
Right.
I think that goes to what Toma was saying earlier about the financial like part of it, is just don't check a box and then underpay them. Like there's this whole other problem of, oh yeah, like, I mean, we see this all the time of like, oh, we're gonna give a woman an opportunity, but then they underpay her. And it's like,
right,
until you change the money, you don't like fully change the game.
I wanted to.
That's like,
Oh, go ahead, Kate. No, you go.
No, I'll just do like a general gripe about indie film, is that like we're being told like diversify, and then we're working with these pitiful budgets, and it's just really frustrating. I mean, I think there's like, that's a whole other conversation of like, how do we make sustainable films, sell them, etc. But also it's like, have diversity, but then work within this crazy number and pay people like just, whatever your state minimum wage is, and make things accessible and have like a safe set for all. But here's nothing to work with, and it just like, that to me is like absolutely infuriating.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like one thing that sometimes I think helps frame, at least for me, how to try to look at everything is actually like, I think the bottom of the funnel isn't representation, the bottom of the funnel is justice, and that's what we're really working towards, is justice. So the economy is a big part of that, the redistribution of economic capital, creative capital, cultural capital, the way people feel about themselves when they step out in the world and how they see themselves represented, how they see themselves sitting in the socioeconomic class and opportunities that they have. I think when we think about that as like the actual centerpiece, it helps us kind of like, it's like a North Star and helps us guide some of the things we're feeling. And I think it helps us also think through the people we work with. I think right now, one of the things I struggle with, because, I'm not really down with like the full tenets of like cancel culture, but also at the same time think that it is sometimes a requirement, because it's hard to know, are people doing things because they believe in it, or is it the new trend and novelty and it's just fashionable right now and it's on to the next thing? So I like to like check receipts whenever possible. Like, what were you doing 5 years ago? What were you doing 7 years ago, 10 years ago? And whenever possible, those are the kind of individuals and people who I'm trying to bring to the forefront or collaborate with. Well, that doesn't mean that I don't think there shouldn't be room for people to like change or evolve. I mean, we're all going through a journey of life and we're all growing, you know what I'm saying? So, but that's hard to kind of figure out, because I think when you do have a room of people who actually care about these things from the top down, a lot of these things become easier to talk about, whether it's, hey, let's pay this person more, let's get a little bit more money for this, like, you know, and rather than like people that kind of are more, you know, it's for the lack of better words, like performative, you know what I mean? And I don't think that stuff will stick. So, so I think the economic justice side of it is like a really big thing. And I think it can help lead to making some like, it helps frame kind of like some of the decision making, I think sometimes.
Yeah, and the credit, you know, it's so important that people are credited appropriately.
Yeah, another form of justice, I think, you know what I'm saying? So
just, and that's the visibility. It's like when that name is on the screen, it means something. There is value to that. And then of course, hopefully they got paid for it. But, you know, just hiding people is not the way forward. And I think there's a lot of work to be done in our industry about, you know, honoring who did the work.
We've spent a lot of time talking about some of the inclusion on things we can see, but one area of inclusion that I'd love to discuss is language, and that goes for obviously people that are non-English speaking, working on predominantly English speaking sets, and that goes from like Spanish or any other language, but also sign language. I mean, you know, we like we said, we're having this caption. It's like, how do we make sets a comfortable space for people when they maybe don't have the same exact educational background or just upbringing that like has them on the same field as other people when it comes to like the language that they speak, how comfortable they are with speaking the language and that sort of stuff. And I think you know, one of the things Yabo mentioned is time, like giving people time and all that kind of stuff. And I can imagine that that's part of the process, but I'd love to hear from any of you about if you've had experiences where there's actors or creators as part of your teams that maybe that you've had to go out of your way to make sure that they feel welcomed and included in the set.
Yeah, on one of the shorts that we just made, the primary language spoken was Mandarin. And so most of our cast, I think all of our cast was Mandarin speakers or Chinese speakers. And it was so important to us and obviously to the director that, and the producers, because we also had natives that, you know, were on the project. And it was so important that the first AD have, you know, what could speak both languages, because we knew that the cast would not be, you know, equally comfortable, I think, if there was not somebody who like, just communication is so important. And so I think it's about, you know, your team will also help you figure out what the needs of your set are. And it's important to have those conversations. And it's important, you know, as producers or, you know, or even collaborators in a project to be either the person who brings up that conversation or the person who supports that conversation and finds, you know, the people that can help make the set more free for everybody and safer for everybody.
Yeah, I think there's the beauty of indie films, in my experience, is the small scale intimacy of approaching like these. There isn't like a rule book, and I've found that like the most I've gained my experience by you know, onboarding someone and then having the conversation of, okay, you're deaf or you're hearing impaired, like what do you need, and talking about that, because I think we have to acknowledge like it's okay to not have the answers, but it takes those really honest questions of like not feeling guilty or ashamed of saying like, I don't, you know, let's work on it together. And then you know, over time you have these go-tos in this game plan of like, this has worked in the past. But I think there's a real value in just connecting with people individually on what their needs are.
And I think the thing about it though is all of this that is being said by Dominica and Katie, which I think is like spot on. It's actually all in the service of making the best work. And that's it. Like, that's the thing that you have to almost like, sometimes it's like, this isn't just about some diversity, or this is not just about social. This is about great output, great creative, great, when you put people, when you have sets like this, when you have that bond between behind the camera and in front of the camera, because honestly, what happens a lot of the time is there's a divide between what's happening in front of the camera in terms of the demographics and psychographics versus what's happening behind the camera. When you can level those things, collaboration happens. And I think independent filmmaking, the spirit of independent filmmaking isn't risk taking. I don't even think these things are really risks, but it is like the difference between a studio model and independent film for me is, one is all about risk aversion. One is about risk is how you make new things in the world. And especially a nascent format and art form like film, like actually going into a film with unknowns. And literally, I think part of making a film is the process of making a film, if that makes sense. And I think like knowing that is actually an okay feeling to say, I'm doing this because I feel like it's the right thing to do. I don't know exactly what the outcome is. You're gonna be happier you did that because it was more personal, versus trying to do something through this like false lens of like, we have to do it the right way, or whatever the dominant culture has kind of placed onto the filmmaking landscape, that we're all here to kind of try to undo.
Yeah. And the work that we do is just, it is so personal, and it is so much about like people and interaction for very long periods of time with others. And I think that the time that people do give and spend and invest in helping, tell a story or championing a story needs to be honored with like a good experience too. And part of a good experience is to feel loved and welcomed and appreciated and connected to the people that you are working with.
Yeah, but I'm not going to put you on the spot if you didn't have something to add, but I thought I saw you come off mute for like a split second earlier.
Thanks. I was just going to lean into what's being said right now about when we get to the point of like, you hire diverse people and then you welcome them on set, but then like it doesn't end with just being like, welcome, everyone's the same and it's great and we're glad you're here. It is about the experience. It is about creating culture and creating a shared value system with the people that you're working with, and being really clear about that. I mean, there are plenty of challenges that we have, like cultural challenges that are already existing on film sets. I'm speaking of sexism, but there's other elements at play that you can really name. Like if you can be intentional about naming these things up front and saying this is not a space for that, and these things will not be tolerated, and here are examples of how this is an example of crossing the line or something like that. Just having a system in place where you're communicating, letting folks know where you stand, how you expect everyone else to stand and to treat each other, and having like, I don't know, I mean, having real repercussions about overstepping, and talking to people directly as a person, saying, hey man, hey woman, that's not cool, we really need to be on the same page about this, whatever it is. Like taking it like a people first kind of situation, because once you get on set, of course, we all know like things are running so fast. If you don't have that kind of shared understanding of what we're doing together, it can get lost very quickly.
We've discussed casting, and an example that was brought up, thank you again for that fantastic quote, Eliza, that was brought on a lot of conversation, was, oh, they were just the best person for the job, so we hired them, not taking into consideration that they weren't exactly the character that we were written for. But I'd love to talk about the opposite and the work that goes into making sure that you are, if you did write a part that is somebody with a disability or is somebody of a certain background, that could mean a broad spectrum of things here. What is the work that goes into making sure that you're casting that role authentically, and what goes into the work when that's not necessarily where you end up for any sort of reason, to make sure that you're telling that story as authentically as possible and making the film inclusive to the community that you're trying to represent?
Right,
those? My headphones just died.
Oh.
Can you finish? Was that question for me or was that for everyone? Because I missed most of it.
No worries. I was just saying your quote brought up obviously when people are cast, when they were cast when they were cast from just being the best person for the role, despite the not necessarily being the type of the description of the character. They did not match the description of the character as written. And I was saying about the opposite, like when you do have a piece that calls for somebody to be of a certain background or a certain physical type, like the steps that are taken and advice that can be given to people that are trying to seek out members of communities that they want to represent, but maybe aren't seeing come into the room.
Well, I mean, I'm not necessarily involved in casting because I'm not a producer. In that instance, we usually just advise someone to work with a casting director, or failing the budget to do that, find a casting associate, because they're much more well-versed in handling that than we are.
We had an interesting experience with Best Summer Ever. I mean, we knew that for our lead role of Sage, we wanted to work with a wheelchair user, and just had like this image in our head, and went out to major agents. We went out to CAA and WME, and they came back and were like, we don't have anybody who fits that description. And it was pretty broad. It was like, we'd like them to be like female identifying, a wheelchair user, in this age range. And it was something like, from like 18 to like 35. And major companies, didn't have anybody that fit that. And so then the journey of eventually meeting Shannon DeVito was just long, and required a lot of just like reaching out to people in different organizations. And we weren't working with a casting director. And I think maybe if we had been, we would have met Shannon quicker. But I think that, we made that film in 2017. So I think that the landscape looks different now. And if someone said, I'd really like to work with a wheelchair user, do you know any casting directors who specifically work with people with disabilities? I could give them several names. But that wasn't the case in 2017, which was really disappointing.
I just want to flag for anybody who's working in documentary, looking for folks who are differently able. There's a group called Forward Doc. They spell it FWD, Forward Doc, but you can find people who work in documentary who are differently able.
They always say you learn from a great boss, but you sometimes even learn even more from a horrible boss. And I don't think it's helpful to call anyone out by name or use any specific examples in the way that we might know who exactly you're talking about. But I would love to hear from any of you that maybe do have examples that come to mind of like, this is an experience that I saw or experienced myself that I walked away saying, oh, that's something I never want to do. Or, you don't have to admit that it was personally you, but saying I never want to do again. What are things that you feel like that you've learned along the way, small or large, that have helped you become a more inclusive creator? We can broaden that a little bit, though, to also just say, are there things that we have not brought up that you feel like you've learned along the way, or just started doing that you feel like we haven't discussed yet that is helpful to people that are creating projects out there, that help them be more inclusive, and to Mohammed's point, just creating better work because of it?
I have one experience that comes to mind. So I actually don't think I've really shared. So I think that's why I was like, I've never really told anyone about this. The feature film I'm working on is based on a short film that I made in 2014. That's kind of a near future film set in a very specific part of where I grew up in, kind of like the one Section 8 area of Silicon Valley. And, you know, it was a short film, so I was able to kind of, in the scope of things, kind of build the world and build the story I wanted to do. Obviously, once you want to make something bigger, and we were talking about it with some TV executives, and it was going the TV route. And this was like 5 years ago when TV was just like, you know, if you guys remember, like it was like everybody's talking about the TV renaissance, you know. I had this experience where, you know, there was somebody that wanted to make the series happen, but they wanted to change the culture of the, so it's Iran. It's a story. I immigrated from Iran after the Iran-Iraq War. So I wrote from a very specific personal place, this story. And then they wanted to make the film, but they wanted to recast it. They're like, we still want to make it an immigration story, but we want it to be cast as a West African character. And I just like, it was like a very bizarre experience for me to have white people tell me that it was very disorienting. And I kind of like just, I'm pretty good at like not, you know, I have a pretty good poker face. I can take, you know, it kind of threw me off like real bad. And the next day I was meeting with some Iranian folks, and they were saying, hey, we don't think you should make this film because it's showing like, why don't you make a film on the successful people of Silicon Valley that are Persian? And it was just like really important moment for me that like, I was like, it was like, both of those things are true, right? Like representation and the cultural authenticity is important. But at the same time, for me, like even in your own community, there can be things that you have to watch out for. And I think both of these things for me were really like things that I think made me, every time something happens, I just kind of pause and I sometimes think about that. So I actually still don't know what I fully take away from it, but I think like sharing that story, I think was like something that came to mind. So I threw it out there.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that.
There's no room for nuance, right? It's like you have to either be showing off, you have to be the best of the best, or you know, trying to bring attention to folks who are really struggling. It's like there's no middle ground. I would just say really quickly, I produced a film called For Akeem. It's a documentary about a teenage Black girl growing up in St. Louis, and her boyfriend was having a lot of run-ins with the law. And I was in the edit room with the directors, 2 white male directors, and I was in the edit room and we're cutting a scene where Antonio, the boyfriend, is talking to a judge, or the judge is calling him up to basically say like, hey man, what's going on? Are you gonna like get this together? You know, he's not really, he's saying it with his eyes. And there's a moment where my directors didn't think it was a moment, you know, they're just like, we need to make the scene a little faster. I'm like, yeah, but look at the way that the judge is looking at him. He's a white judge. He's looking at him not as a Black kid. He's not looking at him as himself as a white judge. He's looking at him as a person who he's just he like is disappointed in, or he cares about, he's worried about. You know, instead of just letting this Black boy be a screw up, you know, he's in that moment a child. He's someone's kid who this judge is looking at him and saying, I know you, I've met you before, I've seen you before, and I'm feeling for you in this moment. I'm as a human adult and thinking that you could be my son, and I don't know what's going on with you, you know? And that heartfelt thing is something that it might not be obvious if there isn't someone in the room who understands more, or has more a closer proximity to that culture or that kind of person. So me being there, I was able to flag it and say, guys, this is really important. And not only is it important, but it's like, I've never seen this before in a film, in this kind of context, in like a traditional judge and bad person, quote unquote, conversation. There isn't that feeling. So this film is gonna be better if we lean into that. So again, it's not only about being on set, but it's also about in the edit room. I mean, the edit is huge. Like that's its own conversation about representation in the edit, because especially documentary, like the editors oftentimes really are a huge collaborator in what the story is being told. And then of course that can extend to marketing. I mean, there's so much to go into in this diversity conversation, but just want to share that example as well.
Yeah.
No, I think you speak to something very important when it comes to editing and post-production. It's important that you have diverse voices and are inclusive in that room as well. I know there's a large discussion about that, not just in documentary filmmaking, but reality television now and all of that, because it really does make a huge difference. I do have a question. I know that we answered this about documentaries, but I'm going to use this as a jumping off point to, in our last few minutes here, share any other resources that you all may use yourself or want to make people aware of. I know we discussed Forward Doc, but we have a question here about any further examples of places that you maybe could look towards if you're looking to diversify your sets with filmmakers with disabilities. So we have obviously the documentary resource, but I don't know if any of you have any resources for non-documentary filmmaking or any other. Like I said, I want to open this up as an opportunity in our last few minutes to share any other resources that you feel like are ones people should be looking out for.
I mean, I'm not dialed into kind of a narrative version of Forward Doc, which is absolutely fantastic. But I think it's about looking, like a quick resource is to look at films. Like if you look at Best Summer Ever and you look at the roster of who worked on it, just that kind of like investigating and research, I think will then like open your eyes to just connecting with people, and some of the best resources or emailing the producer and saying like, hey, I would love some of the info of your crew or recommendations. And I think that can get you pretty far. I think that one like action item I'd love to suggest to people is that on call sheets, adding a pronouns column, which is just like such a small thing to do and an easy ask, but it opens up, like it changes like the culture of your set really quickly, and something that that I do on all of my projects.
That's really helpful. And I think that it's important for us to remember that there are, it's not all big things. Sometimes really small things can make a huge difference. Costanza, were you going to chime in with something?
I thought of Free the Work as a resource. I've definitely used it in the past. I don't know a Forward Doc, similar one, but that's incredible. But yeah, Free the Work would be one that came to mind.
Perfect.
I'm just going to double plug Brown Girls Doc Mafia.
Yeah.
That's been super great for us and super dope for me.
Fantastic. Well, I appreciate you all sharing your resources and your thoughts and feelings today. It's been so lovely to have this discussion, and I hope that I know I just am taking things away from my just daily life. So it's been helpful in even that regard as well. So it's I see people are posting some additional resources in the chat. So certainly, if you're taking a look there or are able to look into any of those, that's fantastic. But I appreciate all of your time here today. Thank you for the work that you're doing and continue to do. And I look forward to seeing much more of it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us and for
Thanks,
taking time
Patrick.
about this. Yeah, it's really important.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thanks all, that was awesome. It's really nice to meet you all too.
I know, it's so good to meet you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much, Patrick. Thank you to all of you for making the time for this conversation. I feel like and thank you for the resources too. This has just been beyond my wildest dreams, exactly what we'd hoped for. And hopefully it's inspiring more folks to think very carefully and thoughtfully about the sets that they're building. So thank you. Please, again, feel free to register for other events, ask any questions, and we're around. We're really excited to have you all be a part of ShortFest virtually this year. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good one.